Exact, incredibly ordinary moments could be elevated. Elevated to have an actual, literal cosmic significance.
That's quite the
I
claim.
mean, what if the simple act of taking a walk could ripple through eternity?
It requires a massive shift in perspective, doesn't it? Because as human beings, we spend so much time trying to just escape the mundane.
Oh, totally. We hate the daily grind.
Right. We are constantly looking for profound meaning in the extraordinary stuff, the big achievements, the rare mountaintop
The
experiences.
vacation.
Yes. But the framework we are analyzing today suggests the complete opposite. It argues that the absolute peak of spiritual existence doesn't require you to, leave your life behind.
Right.
It can happen right there in the middle of your Tuesday morning commute.
Which sounds insane, but to figure out how that is even possible, our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack a very specific, very profound, mystical theology.
And it is deeply mystical.
It really is. We are going to explore how a normal daily routine can actually be transformed into an active participation in the creation and redemption of the universe.
Big words there.
Huge.
I-
But to do this, we have a fascinating stack of sources to go through, specifically the writings of servant of God Luisa Picaretta.
Right. Focusing mostly on her diary excerpts from the year 1926.
Yes, 1926.
Mm.
And the central driving concept of all this material, the core of it all, is a state of being called living in the divine will.
And setting the stage carefully here is crucial because honestly, it is incredibly easy for a modern reader to completely misunderstand what that phrase actually means.
Yeah. I mean, divine will sounds a bit, I don't know, intense.
It does. When you hear a term like living in the divine will, your brain probably defaults to the idea of just, following rules.
Yeah, like an obedience thing.
Exactly. We tend to think of it as passive obedience. God gives a command, you grit your teeth, and you just do your absolute best to follow it.
Like checking off a list of good deeds.
Right. But the theology presented in these 1926 diaries is entirely different. It is not about human submission, actually. It is about divine substitution.
Substitution. Okay, so we aren't just talking about trying really hard to be a good person then.
Far from it. The texts describe a total state of being where the divine actively lives, breathes, and operates through the human.
Wow.
Yeah, it is less about you doing things for God and much more about God doing things in and through you.
Okay, let's bring this down to earth for a second, because before we can talk about how this theology changes the literal fabric of the universe,
We will get to.
which we will, but we have to start with how it changes your morning routine. We really need to move from the abstract concept to the practical everyday how-to.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Yeah. So if I want to live in this framework, what does the source material actually tell me to do when my alarm goes off at like 6 a.m.?
The diaries outline a very specific daily operating procedure, and it starts the literal second you wake up, before the stress of the day gets its hooks into you.
Before I check my phone.
Ideally, yes. In the text, this is referred to as the prevenient act, which essentially means, the first anticipating act of the day.
Okay, and what does that act actually look like in practice? Are we talking about a long meditation?
No, it is a deliberate prayer of offering, but with very specific mechanics. You are explicitly asking the divine to take over your faculties.
Okay.
You are asking God to think in your mind, to look through your eyes, listen through your ears, speak through your mouth, and walk in your steps.
I was thinking about this concept while prepping for this deep dive, and the best way I can visualize it for anyone listening is, it's by comparing it to upgrading a smartphone's operating system.
Oh, that is a fascinating way to frame it. Let's explore that.
Okay, so think about what happens when you update your phone's OS. The apps themselves don't necessarily change, right?
Right, the icons look the same.
Exactly. The email app is still the email app. The
Yeah.
fitness tracker is still just, tracking steps.
Yeah.
So in your life, the apps are eating, walking, answering emails, doing the laundry.
The mundane stuff.
Yep, external physical actions look exactly the same to anyone watching you.
Right.
But with this divine will upgrade, the internal battery powering those apps, the network they are connected to, is suddenly infinite.
That is a great visual.
So you are doing the exact same mundane things, but they are now being processed through a boundless divine system.
That analogy actually captures the mechanics of the text perfectly. I mean, the external reality of the human life remains incredibly ordinary. Luisa Picaretta herself lived a very hidden, confined life in Italy. She wasn't out leading armies or something. But the internal reality, that network you mentioned, becomes entirely limitless.
And that prevenient act you do in the morning.
It acts as the password. It connects you to that network for the entire day.
But I imagine a morning password isn't enough to sustain you until bedtime, right?
Yeah.
Like I'd forget by lunch.
You're absolutely right. The first act sets the baseline, but the diaries then introduce what they call the actual act, or sometimes the present act.
Okay.
This is where you intentionally connect specific real-time tasks to the divine throughout the day.
So I sit down for lunch. Instead of just eating my sandwich, I mentally state something like, I eat in the divine will.
Precisely.
Or I go for a jog and I think, every step I take is a message of love. Something like that.
Yes. You are actively tagging these everyday actions as they happen. And this becomes especially vital, and the sources emphasize this heavily when we look at how the framework handles hardship.
Oh, which is obviously a massive part of the human experience.
Unfortunately, yes. The sources talk extensively about acceptance and reparation.
How does that apply when you hit a pothole? Or worse, when you get a terrible medical diagnosis?
When you encounter something difficult, the practice is to embrace it without complaint, recognizing that it is permitted within this broader divine framework.
Which is easier said than done.
Oh, incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just like stoic endurance. The texts argue that you are meant to replace the world's offenses, its impatience, its anger, its bitterness, with your own acts of love and patience in that exact moment.
So your suffering actually becomes an active tool for repair.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established how an individual's internal OS gets upgraded. But if my internal state is suddenly running on this infinite network, does that just stay in my head?
What do you mean?
Like, what happens to the external world? Does my morning coffee actually do anything for anyone else?
It definitely doesn't stay in your head. The texts make it very clear that you aren't supposed to hoard this upgraded state just for yourself.
Oh.
You are meant to broadcast it to the broader universe. And this broadcasting is done through a practice the sources call the rounds in the divine will.
The outline of these rounds is fascinating to me. The material describes them as a way of spiritually time traveling through the history of salvation.
Yes, mapping that history onto the natural rhythm of your day.
But I need you to explain the mechanics of that. How does tagging my lunch or my walk allow me to time travel? That sounds like sci-fi.
It does sound like sci-fi, but it comes down to the metaphysical nature of the divine will itself. The theology argues that God operates completely outside of time.
In an eternal present.
Exactly. There is no past or future in the divine mind. Therefore, when you offer your actions into the divine will using that upgraded network, your actions also transcend time.
Wait, really?
Yeah. A prayer you make in 2026 can theoretically reach backward to the dawn of creation or forward to the end of time.
Because it has entered that eternal space.
Precisely.
That is mind-bending. I mean, let's
Yeah.
walk through how a normal person actually executes these rounds during a typical day. Because it starts in the morning, right?
Yes, it starts with the morning round, which focuses entirely on creation. So imagine stepping outside for your morning commute. You feel the fresh air, you see the sun, you hear the birds.
Yeah.
The practice here is to mentally place a thank you and an I love you into every single element of creation.
So you are looking at the sun and saying, like, in every ray of light, I send love back to the Creator.
Right. And you are doing this on behalf of all humanity. You are gathering the love placed in nature from the beginning of time and returning it.
Okay, so the morning is about gathering the beauty of creation. But what happens when the day gets ugly? Because let's be honest, when you are stressed at work at 1:00 p.m., staring at a frustrating spreadsheet doesn't exactly feel like looking at a bird.
No, it really doesn't. And the texts anticipate that completely. This brings us to the noon round.
Which shifts the focus.
Yes, it shifts from creation to redemption. Noon is usually when we hit that wall, We are tired, work is stressful, the day is just dragging.
The classic midday slump.
Exactly. And the practice here is to unite that specific midday fatigue, that exact stress you are feeling at your desk, with the historical, physical exhaustion of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
The sources specifically mention uniting your tiredness with his sweat and his exhausted steps on the road to Calvary.
So because your action is in the eternal will, you are literally offering your 21st century midday slump to console a first century suffering.
That is exactly how the theology works.
Then the workday ends.
Yeah.
The sun starts going down, and we enter the evening round, which is focused on sanctification, right?
Right. As the world winds down, you are asked to review the day that humanity just lived. You look at the world, and where you see that humanity forgot God today, you offer remembrance in their place.
Kind of like filling in for people who didn't show up to a shift.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Where there were offenses or anger, you offer reparation. You are using that infinite network to literally fill in the gaps and shortcomings of the human race for that specific day.
And finally, the night round. Resting in the divine will.
This is the space right before sleep. You just surrender your rest. You ask that every heartbeat and every breath you take while unconscious in the dark becomes a continuous, living whisper of love.
Like guarding the world while it sleeps.
Beautifully put, yes.
Okay, hold on. I need to step in and push back on behalf of anyone listening right now.
Go for it.
Because hearing this, I am just imagining a person obsessively narrating their entire life in their head from dawn to dusk.
It sounds like a lot.
Doesn't it? I mean, isn't this utterly exhausting? Trying to mentally tag every single bird you see, every breeze you feel, every heartbeat, every frustrating email with a specific, highly intentional prayer.
Yeah, that would drive anyone crazy.
Practically, it sounds like a recipe for massive spiritual burnout.
It is a completely fair concern, and it's actually one the sources address head-on. The texts explicitly state that these rounds are absolutely not meant to be forced, lengthy prayers.
Oh, they aren't.
No, they are not a stressful, legalistic checklist that you have to tick off to achieve some sort of spiritual high score.
But human beings are just like notoriously forgetful. We get distracted by a single text message. How does a normal person actually maintain this without it turning into a rigid mental spreadsheet?
The sources describe it as an awakening of the soul. It is supposed to become a natural, loving awareness, a disposition.
A disposition.
Think of it like being deeply in love with someone.
Okay.
When you fall in love, you don't have to force yourself to add that person to a to-do list just to remember them throughout the day, right?
You don't set an alarm that says, think about my wife at 2 p.m.
Exactly. Your awareness of them becomes the background radiation of your mind. It
Yeah.
naturally colors how you see things, how you react to things. The rounds are meant to function the exact same way.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is a fluid, continuous posture of the heart, an underlying orientation, rather than a frantic mental tally.
Framing it as the background radiation of the mind is so much more accessible. It's less about calculating every breath and more about shifting your default state of being.
Exactly.
But this brings us to a massive question.
Okay.
Why is there such a desperate need to make these constant reparations? Why do you and I need to fill in the gaps for humanity on a random Tuesday evening? Like, what is fundamentally broken?
To understand why the world needs repairing, we really have to look at the deep cosmological vision of this theology. We need to transition from the daily routine to the actual origins of the fracture.
And this is where the sources give us a truly breathtaking visual. It's from a diary entry dated March 28, 1926, in volume 19 of Louise's writings.
Yes, the vision she had right after taking communion.
It is a sweeping, incredibly cinematic scene. She describes spiritually gathering everyone and everything.
It is massive. She pulls in the Virgin Mary, all the saints, the very first man, Adam, and every generation of humanity, right down to the last person who will ever live.
The scale is wild. And she doesn't even stop with people. She gathers every shining star, every murmuring ocean, every single blooming flower.
Everything.
Yeah, she brings this entire cosmic assembly around Jesus.
And the purpose of this immense gathering is so that absolutely nothing is missing. She wants to ensure that every single work created by the divine is present to offer honor and love.
She wants to present the entirety of creation back to its creator.
Exactly. And Jesus responds to this gathering. He tells her that he is overjoyed to see all his work surrounding him. And he explains that the divine will, often referred to in these texts as the divine fiat, which is the Latin word for let it be done.
The active, creative command of God.
Yes, he says that the divine fiat is what gathers all these blessings together.
Okay, so what went wrong?
Well, he says that if humanity had not withdrawn from that divine fiat in the very beginning, all these blessings, light, strength, beauty, understanding, they would be common to absolutely everyone.
There would be no scarcity.
None at all. And to explain this, the text introduces one of its most profound metaphors. Jesus compares living in the divine will to the sun.
I really want to spend some time on this analogy because it perfectly illustrates the problem.
It really does. Think about the sun in the sky. Everyone can step outside and enjoy its light fully. Me standing in the sunlight doesn't deprive you of the sunlight.
Right.
It is a common, infinite, indivisible good. The text argues that the spiritual life of humanity was supposed to be exactly like that.
But then humanity withdrew. We pulled away from that central unifying will. We wanted something that was just ours.
And Jesus explains that withdrawing from the divine will is like trying to take the sun and divide it into individual, isolated rays.
Which is such a vivid image. Imagine actually trying to hoard a sunbeam. You grab it, you separate it from the sun, and you say, this is mine.
Wow.
This is my personal light.
But the second a ray is separated from its center, its source, it cannot sustain itself.
It inevitably fades into complete darkness.
Exactly. And according to this vision from 1926, this is exactly what happened to humanity's spiritual state. Because of this fracture, because we tried to divide the infinite into the individual, humanity lost the fullness of all those blessings.
The light, the strength, the harmony, it was all shattered and divided.
And that, the text argues, is why humanity now lives in hardship, anxiety, and just a profound sense of lack.
You know, for anyone listening right now, it is incredible how perfectly that ancient theological concept maps onto the way we operate today.
Oh, absolutely.
We constantly try to selfishly hoard our resources, our success, our status. We think we can hold on to the light if we just separate it from everyone else.
And it almost always leaves us feeling isolated and empty.
It really is the tragedy of the separated ray. You are left holding nothing.
Yep. But, understanding this tragedy naturally raises another highly logical question about the timeline of all this.
Which is a question Louisa herself actually asks in the text. She essentially says, okay, if this fiat, this living in the divine will, is so incredibly powerful.
If it contains all these infinite blessings.
Right. And if it's the ultimate solution to the fractured sun, why didn't we start with this?
It's the obvious question. If this is the cure, why was it hidden?
She points out that the Virgin Mary, who in this theology possesses the power to ask for anything, was already praying for the Redeemer to come.
Yes.
So Louisa asks, why didn't Mary just pray for the divine will to be fully restored on earth right then and there, alongside the arrival of Jesus?
Why wait? Right.
Yeah, why wait thousands of years until a diary in 1926 to reveal the ultimate solution?
The answer Jesus gives in the text is actually deeply pragmatic. He explains that restoring the divine will was actually the primary, ultimate goal of everything he and Mary did.
That was always the intended endpoint.
Yes, but humanity was completely spiritually illiterate. The text says that when Jesus came to earth, humanity was blind, sick, and entirely ignorant of heavenly things.
Which brings us to another amazing analogy from the source material to explain this delay. The professor analogy.
I love this one.
It's so good. Have you ever tried to teach something incredibly complex to someone who doesn't even know the basic vocabulary?
Oh, it's impossible. And that is exactly the dynamic the text describes. Jesus compares his situation in the first century to a brilliant professor who possesses the highest, most profound, complex scientific knowledge imaginable.
Think of like a Nobel laureate in astrophysics.
Perfect. Now imagine that professor walks into a classroom ready to deliver a masterpiece lecture and realizes that every single student in the room is completely illiterate.
They don't even know how to read a basic sentence.
Right. If that professor walks to the chalkboard and immediately starts dumping high-level string theory and quantum mechanics on them, it will be a complete disaster.
The students will be hopelessly confused. They will be overwhelmed by the complexity. They'll feel stupid. And ultimately, they will just abandon the professor entirely.
The professor has to adapt.
So what does he do?
Well, to actually help the students, that brilliant professor has to humble himself, put away the advanced science for a moment, and sit down to patiently teach them their simple ABCs.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Only by establishing that foundation can the professor eventually guide the students up to the level where they can comprehend the high science.
So in this framework, the entire event of redemption, Jesus coming to earth, his human life, his moral teachings, his suffering and death, all of that was just the ABCs of salvation.
Exactly. The text states that the redemption was the necessary foundational work. It was the medicine required to heal a sick humanity, to teach them the basic alphabet of grace.
So that eventually, generations later, they would be capable of understanding the high science of living in the divine will.
You've got it.
That completely reframes the entire timeline of human history. I mean, it makes you look at the last 2,000 years, not as just, a static waiting room for the end of the world, but as a long, incredibly slow school curriculum.
Humanity has just been slowly learning to read.
Preparing for a final graduation.
And because of this long curriculum, Jesus points out to Louisa that she actually has a unique advantage in the 20th century, even over the historical figures of the past.
Because she has the completed coursework.
Exactly. Mary had the prophecies and the hopes of the Old Testament, but Louisa, writing in 1926, has the fully actualized historical life of the Redeemer behind her.
She has the whole textbook.
Yes, she has Mary's completed works, and she has the entire history of the Church's prayers and sacraments acting as a massive foundation. She isn't starting from scratch. She is standing on millennia of spiritual education to finally usher in this ultimate goal.
Man, let's bring this massive journey back down to earth and just kind of summarize what we've uncovered today in this deep dive.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. So we started looking at a simple morning prayer, the Prevenient Act, offering up the routine of answering emails and drinking coffee.
Right.
We learned how to use the daily rounds to broadcast that internal upgrade across time, uniting our afternoon stress with historical redemption.
The midday slump turned into a prayer.
Yeah. We moved to a cosmic vision of gathering oceans and stars around the Creator, and finally ended up looking at the entire history of humanity as a millennia-long curriculum, where we are just learning our spiritual ABCs.
It is a theology that simply refuses to let anything remain ordinary. It demands that every single action, every era of history, and every mundane moment is deeply connected to a single, unifying, divine purpose.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a challenging thought directly inspired by that incredible divided sun analogy.
It's a powerful image.
The sources make it undeniably clear. Separating yourself from the divine will is like trying to divide the sun into individual rays. And once separated, those rays inevitably fade into darkness. Now, look at our hypermodern world today. We are absolutely obsessed with extreme individualism.
It is arguably the defining philosophy of our current culture.
Yeah, everything is about finding my personal truth, achieving my individual success, forging my separate path. We celebrate the isolated ray of light above all else.
We really do.
But I want you to really consider this. Are the soaring anxieties, the deep cultural isolation, and the fragmentation of modern life exactly what was meant in 1926 by the darkness of a divided sunbeam?
Have we successfully hoarded the light only to watch it vanish in our hands?
Right. Think about your own life, your own routines. What would actually happen tomorrow morning when you wake up and face the ordinary day if you chose to step out of your individual isolated ray of light and back into the sun? Instead of just eating my sandwich, I mentally state something like, I eat in the divine will.
Precisely.
Or I go for a jog and I think,
First part of the day.
or, the rote, repetitive mechanics of answering a flood of morning emails, chewing your lunch, or even just the simple and voluntary act of breathing.
Just existing, basically.
Exactly. But now I want you to imagine something truly radical. What if those